They said the maid didn't belong in that room. Not in a hall filled with millionaires. Not at a wedding that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. She was supposed to serve quietly. Invisible. Forgettable. But when she stepped forward, looked directly at the bride, and called her by a different name, everything stopped. The music. The laughter. The wedding. Because in that moment, the perfect bride wasn't perfect anymore. She was exposed. Who was the woman in the white dress? Who was the maid, really, and why did she risk everything? And how does one name, one single word spoken aloud in a room full of powerful people, unravel a life built on years of careful, deliberate lies? Stay with me. Because this story doesn't begin at the altar. It begins years before that day. In a small town. In a family that had nothing. And in a decision that changed everything. Lena Marsh grew up in Greystone Falls, a small, unremarkable town in the Midwest that had the particular sadness of a place that once had something to offer the world and slowly stopped believing it did. Her father was a bookkeeper. Her mother cleaned offices 3 nights a week. Between the two of them, they kept the lights on and food on the table, and not much else. But there was one thing they had in abundance. Pride. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't show off, doesn't complain, just holds its head up and keeps moving. Lena was their only child, and she grew up understanding the unspoken contract of a modest life. Work hard, stay honest, and good things will follow eventually. She believed that for a long time. She was 22 when her father's small accounting firm began managing funds for a regional investment company called Hale Capital. It seemed like a lucky break. Their biggest client yet. More money coming in than they'd ever seen. Her father was proud. He'd worked for 30 years building something from nothing, and finally, it felt like it was paying off. He trusted them completely. That was his mistake. 18 months later, everything collapsed. The investment company, Hale Capital, was exposed as a fraud. Not a small fraud. A systematic, deliberate, years-long scheme that had funneled money out of accounts belonging to ordinary people. Teachers. Retirees. Small business owners. And her father, unknowingly, had been keeping their books. He didn't know. He wasn't complicit. But he was associated. His name was in the documents. His firm's letterhead was on statements that had been doctored without his knowledge. By the time investigators sorted it out, it was too late. The damage was done. His reputation was destroyed. His clients vanished. He tried to fight it, but the legal fees alone were enough to finish off what little they had left. He died 2 years later, not from any single illness, but from the kind of slow defeat that settles into a man's bones when the thing he built with his life gets taken from him. Lena's mother followed 14 months after. And Lena was left alone. 25 years old. No inheritance. No college degree. A mountain of medical debt. And a hollow, burning need to understand how this happened. She researched the fraud case obsessively. Every article. Every court document she could access. She learned the name of the company's founder, the primary architect of the scheme. A woman. Her name was Marissa Hale. And by the time criminal investigators came looking for her, Marissa Hale had disappeared. Completely. Cleanly. As if she had never existed. Lena applied for every job she could find. She had no connections, no references, no glamorous resume. What she had was reliability. Precision. The ability to work hard in rooms where no one thanked her. She ended up in event catering. Then hospitality. Then high-end private events, the kind thrown by the wealthy, in estates and ballrooms and private gardens. She was good at it. She knew how to move through a room without disturbing it. How to refill a glass before it was empty. How to be present without being visible. She worked quietly for 3 years. Watching people who never noticed her. Saving what she could. Carrying a photograph of Marissa Hale, taken from an old news article, folded in her wallet. Because Lena had not stopped looking. She never stopped looking. Marissa Hale had always understood one thing about the world with perfect clarity. People believe what they want to believe. Show them beauty and confidence and authority, and they will fill in everything else themselves. They will assume the education. Assume the credentials. Assume the goodness behind the smile. She had built her entire life on this understanding. The investment firm hadn't started as a fraud. At least that's what she told herself. It had started as something almost legitimate, a high-risk, high-return vehicle for wealthy clients who wanted more than what traditional banks offered. She was good at it. She understood markets with an almost intuitive brilliance that surprised even the people who tried to underestimate her. But the margins were tight. And she was ambitious. And somewhere between ambition and desperation, a line got crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Money began moving in ways it shouldn't. Client accounts were papered over with statements that looked real but weren't. New investors' money was used to pay returns to old investors. By the time she knew it was falling apart, she had two choices: stay and face the ruin, or disappear. She chose to disappear. She was methodical about it. She had planned for this possibility long before it became necessary. A secondary identity, paperwork obtained through channels she preferred not to think about too carefully. A new name. New hair color. New city. New everything. Vanessa Clark was born in a hotel room in Phoenix, Arizona on a Tuesday afternoon, while Marissa Hale ceased to exist. She moved to New York. Then to London. Then back to New York. She worked in finance, carefully, at the edges, leveraging skills without leaving a footprint. She reinvented her accent, refined her mannerisms, polished every surface of herself until nothing remained of the woman who had once run a fraudulent investment company in the Midwest. She was extraordinarily good at becoming who she needed to be. And then she met Ethan Carter. She hadn't planned it. That was the strange thing. She hadn't gone looking for a billionaire. She had simply been living her careful, curated life at a charity gala in Manhattan, attending because it was the kind of event that Vanessa Clark, her invented self, was supposed to attend, when a tall, serious-eyed man sat next to her at the dinner table and said, with no pretension whatsoever, "I hate these things. Do you hate these things?" And she had laughed, genuinely, not performed, and said yes. Ethan Carter was not what she had expected a billionaire to be. He was quiet. Thoughtful. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He had a dry wit he deployed sparingly, which made it land harder when it came. He seemed, beneath all the money and the name, like a person who was genuinely trying to figure out how to be good at life. She fell for him. Slowly, then all at once. Which made everything so much more complicated. Because she couldn't tell him who she was. Who she had been. She couldn't risk it. Not with everything she had built. Not with the investigation still technically open. Not with the possibility, however slim, that someone somewhere was still looking for Marissa Hale. So she kept being Vanessa. She was good at being Vanessa. She told herself it would be fine. That the past was buried. That she had changed. That she was, in every way that mattered, a different person now. She told herself that so many times, she almost started to believe it. And then the wedding was announced. And Lena Marsh was hired to work the event. The Carter estate sat at the end of a private road, 3 miles outside the city, surrounded by old oaks that looked like they had been there before the country had a name. The estate itself was stone and ivy, vast, cold, beautiful, the kind of place that made you feel the weight of old money just by standing in front of it. Lena arrived at 6 in the morning with the rest of the catering team. White vans. Crates of glassware. Floral arrangements so elaborate they required their own transport. She had worked events at the Carter estate once before. 3 years ago. A birthday dinner for Ethan's father. She had barely noticed it then, just another job, another ballroom, another set of wealthy faces she'd forget by morning. She had no reason to think today would be any different. The team was briefed by the estate's event coordinator, a precise, impeccably dressed woman named Helen who spoke in clipped sentences and left no room for questions. There would be 300 guests. Seating in 2 shifts, ceremony in the East Garden, reception in the Grand Ballroom. The bridal party would arrive at noon. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock precisely. No delays were acceptable. Lena was assigned to the ballroom, refreshments, pre-ceremony. She moved quietly through the space, setting up stations, checking glassware, doing what she did best. Being invisible. At 11:45, the bridal party arrived through the south entrance. Lena was carrying a tray of champagne flutes toward the anteroom when she heard the sound of heels on marble and caught, out of the corner of her eye, a flash of ivory silk. She almost kept walking. But something made her turn. And she saw the bride. The woman was breathtaking, there was no other word for it. Tall. Poised. A sweep of dark hair pinned up with precision, a few loose strands framing a face that seemed almost architecturally perfect. She moved through the room greeting people with warmth that appeared entirely genuine, laughing at something a bridesmaid said, touching Ethan's mother's arm with the practiced intimacy of someone who had long since won the approval of the room. And Lena stopped. Because something was wrong. Not anything she could immediately name. Just a frequency of recognition, deep and unsettling, like hearing a song you can't quite place but know you've heard before. She watched the bride for a long moment. The way she tilted her head when she listened. The way her smile arrived slightly slower than the laugh, always a beat behind, like it was being consciously deployed rather than spontaneously felt. The way she positioned herself in the room, always with the wall at her back, always angled slightly away from the main door, like someone who had spent years knowing where the exits were. Lena told herself she was imagining things. She went back to work. But the feeling didn't leave. It grew. Over the next hour, Lena found reasons to be in every room the bride passed through. She served champagne near the bridal suite. She cleared glasses in the hallway where the wedding party gathered for photographs. Each time she came close, the feeling intensified. Something about the eyes. Something about the bone structure beneath the carefully applied makeup. Something she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. At 12:45, Lena slipped away from her station for 3 minutes, a risk she had never taken in years of professional events. She went to her locker. Opened it. Reached into her coat pocket. Unfolded the photograph she had carried for 3 years. The photo was from a business article, 6 years old. Low resolution, but clear enough. A woman in a gray blazer, mid-smile, standing in front of a company logo. Sharp eyes. Strong jaw. Dark hair worn down. Lena held it under the locker room light. She studied it for a long time. Then she folded it back up, very carefully, and returned to the ballroom. She was certain now. Almost certain. 90%. Which meant there was still 10% of doubt, enough, maybe, to stay quiet. Enough to tell herself she was wrong, that grief and obsession had made her see things that weren't there, that this beautiful woman in this beautiful estate was exactly who she said she was. And then, at 1:15, as Lena was replenishing a side table near the entrance to the bridal suite, the door opened. The bride stepped out alone for a moment, just a moment, checking something on her phone, unaware she was being observed. She turned slightly, and her gown shifted at the wrist. A small scar. Crescent-shaped. The inside of the left wrist. Lena knew that scar. It was in the case file she had memorized. A detail from a medical intake form that had been leaked by a paralegal who later lost his job for it. The investigator's report had described it, a distinctive crescent scar, inside the left wrist, result of a childhood accident. Lena's hands went very still on the tray she was holding. The 10% of doubt vanished. And then she had to decide what to do with 100% of certainty. The east garden of the Carter estate was, on that afternoon, as close to perfect as money and preparation could make anything. White chairs arranged in precise rows, each with a small ribbon tied at the back. Rose petals on the stone pathway. A string quartet playing something from another century, delicate and aching. The late afternoon light filtering through the oak canopy in long golden bars, catching the dust motes in the air and making everything look slightly unreal, slightly too beautiful to be trusted. 300 people took their seats. Lena stood at the back edge of the garden, near the service table set up along the far wall. This was her station for the ceremony. She was supposed to be invisible here. She was supposed to be still. She was not still. Her mind was running at a speed that was making it hard to breathe. She had spent the last 40 minutes in a private war with herself. Arguments on both sides, cycling endlessly. Say nothing. You could be wrong. A scar isn't enough. Lots of people have scars. You have no proof beyond an old photograph and a detail from a leaked document. If you're wrong, if you step into this wedding and you're wrong, you will destroy an innocent woman's life. You will lose your job. You may face legal consequences. You will have done something monstrous in the name of justice. Say something. You know what you saw. You know what she took. Not just money, your parents. Your father spent his last years as a broken man because her fraud destroyed his reputation. Your mother died in a hospital room with medical bills she couldn't pay because there was nothing left. 300 other families. Teachers and retirees and ordinary people who trusted a woman who was constitutionally incapable of honoring that trust. And now that woman is standing in an ivory gown about to marry a good man under a stolen name, and she is going to do it because she ran and no one caught her, and she has spent 3 years believing that she won. Say nothing. Say something. The music shifted. Ethan Carter appeared at the altar. Tall, composed, a slight flush of emotion visible even from a distance. He looked like a man who had not expected to be this happy, and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. He straightened his jacket. He looked toward the entrance to the garden. And then the bride appeared. The quartet played the processional. Guests rose. Cameras were lifted. She walked down the aisle slowly, precisely, with the contained grace of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind so many times that the reality of it felt almost cinematic. She looked at Ethan with an expression that was, Lena had to admit this, even now, genuinely tender. Whatever Marissa Hale had become, whatever she had done, the emotion on her face as she walked toward this man was not entirely performed. That made it worse somehow. And harder. The officiant began to speak. Words about love. About commitment. About two people choosing each other in full knowledge of who they are. Full knowledge. Lena's jaw tightened. The officiant reached the part of the ceremony she had been dreading and waiting for simultaneously. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two people should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. A ceremonial pause. Brief. Perfunctory. The kind of pause that has become a formality because in the modern world, no one ever actually speaks. The officiant drew breath to continue. And Lena stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud. She hadn't raised it. But the garden was quiet enough that even a whisper would have carried, and she had spoken with the particular clarity of someone who has rehearsed a sentence so many times it comes out clean and absolute. The nearest guest turned first. Then more. Then everyone. A woman in a service uniform, standing at the edge of the ceremony, holding nothing, looking at the altar with an expression that was impossible to categorize. Not angry, not panicked, just terribly, terribly certain. The officiant stared. Ethan stared. The bride. The bride did not move. Someone in the front row said quietly, in the tone of polite confusion, "Is this part of something?" It was not. Lena walked forward. Slowly. Every step deliberate. The guests parted, not because they were making way but because they were simply too stunned not to. A uniformed woman moving down the aisle toward the altar of a billionaire's wedding with the measured gravity of someone who has thought about this moment for 3 years. She stopped 10 feet from the altar. She looked at the bride directly. and she said the name. Marissa. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. The bride's face. And this was the moment Lena would think about for a long time afterward. The bride's face did something very specific and very telling. It did not show confusion. It showed recognition. A brief, involuntary flash, the jaw tightening, the pupils contracting, the unmistakable physiological response of a person who has just heard their real name spoken aloud in a room where they believed it was buried forever. And then, almost immediately, the mask came back up. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Calm. Measured. The voice of a woman who has navigated much worse. But Lena had seen the flash. And she knew every person who had been watching closely had seen it too. "My name is Lena Marsh," she said. "And your name is not Vanessa Clark." The garden was completely silent now. Even the birds had stopped. If you're still watching, comment, "I'm still here." Because this is where everything changes. Ethan Carter's face had gone through several distinct expressions in the space of 20 seconds. Confusion. Concern. A protective instinct. He stepped slightly in front of his bride. And then, as Lena kept talking, something else. Something that looked, from a distance, like the slow dismantling of certainty. "This is my wedding," he said, and his voice was very controlled. "I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but—" "I know you don't," Lena said. "And I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry that this is happening here and now. But there are things you need to know before you finish those vows." His jaw tightened. "Security. Ethan." It was his mother. Standing from the front row, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a woman who had spent 6 decades in rooms where things mattered. Let her speak. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Something about his mother's voice, or perhaps something about the expression on Vanessa's face, made him pause. He looked at his bride. She was very still. Too still. The kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from the conscious suppression of flight. He looked back at Lena. "You have 2 minutes," he said. And Lena told them everything she knew. She told it simply, without drama, without embellishment, in the precise and methodical way of someone who has rehearsed a testimony because the truth matters too much to be muddied by emotion. She told them about Hale Capital. About the investment fraud. About the money, $43 million drained from ordinary people over 6 years. She told them about the investigation that was opened and the suspect who disappeared before she could be charged. She told them about Marissa Hale. Her appearance. Her history. The distinctive crescent scar on her left wrist. At this, Ethan's eyes went involuntarily to his bride's left hand. She had, at some point in the last 3 minutes, turned her wrist slightly inward. The murmur that ran through the crowd was low and continuous, like the sound of a tide coming in. Phones were out now. People were searching. The name Marissa Hale appeared on screens across the garden, old news articles, court filings, a photograph from a business profile 6 years old. Lena saw the moment it traveled. The way the image passed from one phone to the next, people leaning to look, then looking up at the woman at the altar, then back at the screen. She told them about her father. She kept that part brief. Not because it was less important, but because it was too important to reduce to ammunition. Her father had been a good man. He had worked honestly his whole life. He had been used as unwitting cover for a fraud he didn't know about, and he had spent his final years trying to prove that. "He died before the investigation concluded," she said. "My mother died a year after. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this so you understand that the woman standing next to you is not a person who made one bad decision. She is a person who took everything from hundreds of people and then vanished rather than face what she'd done." Ethan had not moved. He was looking at his bride. "Tell me she's wrong," he said. His voice was quiet. Almost nothing. "Just tell me she's wrong." The woman in the ivory gown looked at him for a very long moment. Something crossed her face, not the mask, not Vanessa, but something older and rawer and more honest than anything she had shown in years. And then she said nothing. The silence was its own answer. Ethan stepped back. One step. It was a small movement. But in the context of where they were standing and what had just happened, it was devastating. And it broke something that neither of them would ever fully account for. The next 20 minutes were not loud. That was the strange thing about it. The part that people who were there would later describe in hushed, almost puzzled tones. You would expect shouting. Accusations. Hysteria. The kind of operatic collapse that a moment like this seems to demand. Instead, it was quiet. Methodically, the wedding ended. Ethan's father made a call. Then two more. The estate's legal team arrived with a speed that suggested this family had learned, over generations, how to respond swiftly to crisis. Guests were asked, politely and firmly, to leave the garden and wait in the reception hall or depart at their discretion. Most left. Some hovered near the entrance, unable to fully disengage from what they'd witnessed, performing the act of checking on things while actually just watching. Marissa, because that was who she was now in this room, stripped of the other name, did not fight. She did not scream or deny or perform outrage. The people who had expected that were surprised by what she actually did, which was simpler, and in its own way more devastating. She sat down. In one of the white ceremony chairs, still in the ivory gown, and she put her face in her hands. Not weeping. Not exactly. But something close to it. The posture of a person who has been running for a very long time and has finally stopped. 2 investigators arrived within the hour. It emerged later that the case against Marissa Hale had never been formally closed. There were still people looking. Lena's information, relayed through the estate's legal team, was enough to initiate the process of formal identification and the beginning of extradition proceedings. When the investigators spoke to her, she was cooperative. Entirely cooperative. She answered questions in a flat, precise voice that sounded like the last version of herself, not Vanessa, not entirely Marissa, just a woman in the ruins of both. Ethan Carter did not go back to the garden. His mother told a reporter, 3 weeks later, that he had left the estate within the hour. When the life you believed you were stepping into turns out to have been constructed specifically to deceive you, the grief of it is a particular kind, not clean, not simple, but shot through with questions that can never be fully answered. Did she love him? Was any of it real? Can something be genuine and also be built on a foundation of lies? These are questions without good answers. The guests dispersed. The flowers wilted slowly in the afternoon sun, still beautiful, still pointless. The string quartet, paid through the reception, quietly packed their instruments and left. And the Carter estate, which had not hosted a wedding in decades, would not host another one for a very long time. Lena left the estate the same way she had arrived. In the white van with the rest of the catering team. Her uniform still pressed. Her tray returned to its rack. She signed out on the clipboard the coordinator held near the service entrance, and the coordinator, the precise, impeccable Helen, looked at her for a long moment and said nothing. Just made the mark. In the van, no one spoke to Lena directly. They talked around what had happened, the way people do when they've witnessed something too large for immediate language. She looked out the window the whole way back. She thought she might feel something large. Relief, or vindication, or the particular catharsis that stories promise when the wrong person finally gets their moment. She felt tired. Profoundly, achingly tired, the kind that comes when you have been carrying something for so long that putting it down doesn't feel like freedom yet. It just feels like the absence of weight. And the body, unused to the absence, doesn't quite know what to do. She thought about her father. She thought about her mother. She thought, I don't know if this is enough. I don't know if anything is ever enough. But it's done. And it was true. And I didn't stay silent. She was let go from the catering company the following week. They cited disruption of an event, which was fair enough, and which she had expected. She didn't contest it. 2 weeks later, she received a call from a law firm representing several of the Hale Capital fraud victims. Investigators, working with the information that had emerged from the wedding incident, had made progress in untangling where some of the money had gone. There were recovered assets. There would be proceedings. Nothing would be fully restored, it never was, but there were people whose names might finally be cleared, whose losses might be partially acknowledged, whose years of silence might finally be broken. Among them, the estate of a bookkeeper from Greystone Falls, whose professional reputation had been destroyed by association. Lena sat with that for a long time when the call ended. Her father's name. Cleared. She cried then, the first time, really, since she had stepped forward in that garden. The kind of crying that has been waiting for permission for a very long time. She didn't know what came next. She would figure it out. She always did. She had spent years being the person in the room that no one noticed, and somewhere in that invisibility she had developed a quality that the noticed people often lack, the ability to see clearly. To observe without the distortion of wanting to be seen. It had saved her from bitterness. It had given her the patience to wait. And on a Tuesday afternoon in the east garden of the Carter estate, it had finally, quietly, changed everything. Not with a weapon or a speech or a viral moment. With one name. Spoken plainly. At the right moment. By a woman no one had thought to notice. So tell me. If you were Lena, standing at the back of that garden, holding a tray, watching a fraudster walk down the aisle toward a good man who doesn't know the truth. Would you step forward? Or would the fear of being wrong, of being the maid who disrupted a billionaire's wedding and had nothing but a 3-year-old photograph and a crescent scar to prove it, would that be enough to keep you silent? Because here's the thing no one talks about. Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in a garden, in an afternoon light, spoken by a woman in a uniform that costs $40. Sometimes the person who changes everything is the one everyone forgot to see. Drop your answer below. I read every one. And if stories like this stay with you long after they end, subscribe. Because the next one is already waiting. And it's even more unbelievable than this one.